Before we begin tonight, I want to ask you something. Wherever you are right now, under a blanket, in the dark, maybe with rain against the window, or maybe just the quiet hum of a city outside, tell me what time it is for you. And tell me what country you're listening from tonight. I like knowing that. I like imagining all the different places this story is landing in all at once while the rest of the world sleeps. Somewhere it's almost morning, somewhere it's the middle of the night, and somewhere right now, someone is hearing this for the very first time. So get comfortable, let your shoulders drop, let your breathing slow down. Tonight's story isn't about monsters or fear or anything that should keep you awake. It's something gentler than that and stranger, too. It's about silence, the kind of silence that fills almost all of space, and about the one time, just one time, that we know of that silence seemed to do something it had never done before. It answered. Let's start with the size of things, because that's where the story really begins. If you've ever looked up at the night sky and felt small, you were right to feel that way. Not in a sad sense, just accurately. The night sky is not just dark because the sun has gone down. It's dark because almost everything out there is impossibly far away and impossibly quiet. For most of human history, that silence was simply the way things were. People looked up, told stories about the stars, gave them names, drew shapes between them, but no one expected an answer. The sky was a ceiling, beautiful and unreachable. Then, slowly, that began to change. In the middle of the 20th century, scientists started building machines whose only purpose was to listen, not to look to listen. Massive dishes, curved like the inside of a seashell, pointed not at the ground, but up into that vast quiet, waiting for the smallest whisper of something that didn't belong there. It's a strange kind of job, if you think about it. Spending your life listening for something that by all reasonable expectation will probably never come. And yet, people did it, patiently, for years, for decades. One of those people was a man working at a radio telescope in the state of Ohio, in the United States. The telescope had a nickname. People called it Big Ear. It wasn't glamorous. It was a long, flat structure built into a hillside, more like a giant outdoor instrument than the sleek dishes you might picture. But Big Ear had one job, and it did that job every single day, sweeping slowly across the sky as the earth turned beneath it, recording whatever passed through its field of view. Most days, what passed through was nothing, background noise, the faint static hum of the universe itself, a kind of cosmic whisper left over from the very beginning of everything, so faint and so even that it became its own kind of silence. But on one particular night, August the 15th, 1977, something different happened. I want you to picture it for a moment, not as a scientific event, but as a quiet, ordinary night. It's late summer in Ohio. The air outside is warm, maybe a little humid, crickets somewhere, the hum of the telescope's machinery, steady and unremarkable. The way a refrigerator hums in another room, something you stop noticing after a while. Inside, the telescope is doing what it always does, recording, printing out long strips of paper covered in numbers and letters, a kind of slow, mechanical diary of the sky. No one is watching it happen in real time. That's important. No one was sitting there, headphones on, waiting for a signal. The data was simply being recorded the way it was recorded every night, to be looked at later. And for a few days, it wasn't until a few days later that a man named Jerry Amon, an astronomer working as a volunteer on the project, sat down with the stacks of printouts to go through them page by page, looking for anything unusual. This was tedious work, page after page of numbers, mostly low, mostly forming the same gentle, meaningless pattern. the kind of work that asks for patience more than excitement. You don't expect to find anything. You're looking mostly to confirm that there's nothing there. And then on one page, there was something there. I won't go too deep into the technical details, not tonight. Tonight isn't really about the numbers. But I'll tell you the shape of what he saw, because the shape of it is what makes this story so strange. The printout recorded signal strength using numbers 1 through 9 and then letters for anything stronger than 9. Almost everything on the page was low ones, 2s, 3s, the normal, gentle background of space. But in one place, for about 72 seconds, the numbers climbed and climbed. 6, 7, then a letter U, then higher, still a letter that meant the signal was more than 30 times stronger than the background noise around it. Then, just as smoothly as it had risen, it faded back down. 6, 5, then nothing, back to the gentle hum. 72 seconds. That's all it was. Less time than it takes to boil an egg. Less time than most songs. And in the margin of that printout, Jerry Eman did something that, without meaning to, would echo for the next 50 years. He circled it, and next to it, he wrote a single word. Wow. I want to pause here for a moment, because I think it's worth sitting with that word. Not discovery, not contact, just wow. It's such a human reaction, isn't it? The word you say when something surprises you so completely that your mind hasn't caught up yet to find a more careful word. The word you say before you start thinking while you're still just feeling. That single word scribbled almost casually in pen in the margin of a printout became the name for the entire event. The wow signal. And in a strange way, I think that's fitting, because what happened that night in Ohio wasn't really about proof or certainty or grand declarations. It was about surprise. A small, strange surprise in the middle of an ordinary night, in the middle of an ordinary job that no one was expecting and no one has ever been able to fully explain. So what was it exactly, the signal that climbed so high, then disappeared? Here's what we know. The signal arrived on a very specific radio frequency, one that, interestingly, falls very close to a frequency associated with hydrogen, the most common element in the universe. Some scientists had long speculated that if anyone, anywhere, were trying to get attention across the vastness of space, this particular frequency might be a logical choice, a kind of universal language, written not in words, but in physics itself. The signal was also extremely narrow-focused, rather than spread out the way a natural source like a star or a cloud of gas tends to be. Natural sources of radio waves are usually messy, broad, smeared across many frequencies. This was tight, precise, almost like someone had tuned a radio to one exact station. And it came from a very specific direction in the sky toward a region near the constellation Sagittarius, in a part of the sky with very few bright stars. Nothing obvious that would explain such a strong, focused burst. For 72 seconds, the signal was there, strong, clear, real. And then it was gone. Here's the part of the story that, to me, is the strangest of all. They looked for it again. Of course they did. You would, wouldn't you? If you heard something like that, something so brief, so strange, so specific, wouldn't you want to know if it would happen again? Astronomers pointed telescopes back at that same patch of sky, again and again, over the following weeks, months, even years. Different telescopes, different teams, all searching for the same thing, a repeat, a second signal. Anything that would let them say, there, that's it again. Now we can study it properly. and they found nothing, not a fainter version, not a different frequency from the same direction, not even noise that resembled it, just silence. The same vast, patient silence that fills almost everything everywhere. It's a strange kind of mystery when you think about it. Not a mystery of what is this thing we keep finding, but a mystery of what was that thing we found exactly once. Now, I think it's important, and I think you'd want me to be honest with you about this, because that's part of what makes a story worth telling at night, that most explanations for the wow signal are not about visitors from another world. Over the decades, scientists have proposed all kinds of possibilities. Could it have been a passing comet, its icy surface reflecting radio waves in just the right way? For a while, that explanation gained some attention, though later checks suggested the comets suggested weren't actually in the right place at the right time. Could it have been some kind of reflection, a signal from Earth itself, bouncing off a piece of space debris, like light bouncing off a mirror? Possible, though nothing matching that has ever been confidently identified. Could it simply be something we don't have a category for, yet some natural astronomical event, rare and brief, that we've simply never managed to observe again? That last one, honestly, might be the most likely. The universe is full of things that happen once, briefly, and never again in a way we can witness flashes of energy from events so far away and so short-lived that catching them is almost pure chance. But here's the thing about we don't know yet. It doesn't close the story, it leaves it open, and I think that's really what this story is about, more than the signal itself. It's about the experience of listening, really listening to something vastly larger than yourself for a very long time, with no guarantee that you'll ever hear anything back. And then just once for 72 seconds, hearing something that didn't fit, something that for a moment felt like it might be a reply, and then losing it again. Think about how many nights those telescopes had already listened quietly before that night. Think about how many nights they've listened since, just as quietly, just as patiently, and heard nothing like it again. There's something almost tender about that, isn't there? A kind of cosmic patience, decades of careful, quiet attention for the sake of one strange, unrepeatable moment. I think sometimes we forget how recent all of this is. For nearly all of human history, for the vast majority of the time people have existed on this earth, no one was listening to the sky in this way at all. People looked up, they wondered, they told stories, built monuments, charted the movements of stars across centuries. But the idea that you could point an instrument at the darkness and listen for a message that's only a few generations old, a blink, really, compared to everything that came before. And in that blink, in that tiny sliver of time, we heard just once something we still can't fully explain. What does that tell us? Maybe nothing definite, but maybe something quietly important, that the universe is not as empty of surprises as it sometimes feels. That even within the small amount of time we've spent truly paying attention, something unusual happened. Not proof of anything, just a reminder that the door isn't closed. I think this is a good place to pause for tonight, not because the story is finished, but because I want to leave some space for it to sit with you as you drift off. In the next part, we'll talk about some of the other strange signals and unexplained moments that have come from deep space over the decades, quieter stories, less famous, but just as strange in their own way. We'll also talk about what scientists mean when they talk about listening to the universe, and why, even after 50 years of silence, so many of them haven't stopped. But for now, I just want you to imagine that hillside in Ohio, the warm summer night, the quiet hum of the machine doing its slow, patient work. And somewhere far above, in a part of the sky with almost nothing in it for 72 seconds, something passed through, and then it was quiet again. Sleep well tonight. And if you happen to look up before you close your eyes, just for a moment, you might find yourself wondering what else might be passing through right now in that quiet, patient dark. The night humanity received an answer from the sky. Welcome back. If you're just joining now, you don't need to have heard the first part to settle into this one. All you need to know is this: somewhere above you, right now, in the dark between the stars, there is silence. A silence so old, so deep, that it almost has a texture of its own. And once, just once, 50 years ago, that silence briefly changed shape. Tonight, we're going to widen the view a little. We're going to talk about what it actually means to listen to the universe, who does it, how they do it, and why, even after decades of hearing nothing, so many of them keep going back to do it again. So settle in, let the blankets settle around you, and let's drift a little further out. The loneliest job in science. I want you to imagine a different kind of workplace. Most jobs, even quiet ones, have some kind of feedback. You do something and something happens. An email gets answered, a shelf gets stocked, a patient gets better. There's a rhythm of cause and effect that, even on slow days, reminds you that your work is connected to something. Now imagine a job where for your entire career, 30 years, 40 years, the most likely outcome every single day is nothing. Not nothing happened today, but something might happen tomorrow. Nothing, full stop, as the expected result. Nothing as the baseline. Nothing as success in a way, because nothing means the instruments are working, the data is clean, and the universe on this particular day simply had nothing unusual to say. That is, in a very real sense, the job of someone who searches for signals from other worlds. It's a strange kind of patience, the kind that doesn't get easier with time the way some kinds of patience do. If anything, it gets harder because the longer you listen without hearing anything, the more reasonable it becomes to wonder whether you ever will. And yet, people keep doing it. Not because they're certain they'll succeed, almost the opposite, because they've made peace with the idea that they might not, and they've decided the listening itself still matters. I find that quietly moving, the idea that some of the most patient, careful work being done by our species right now is work whose entire purpose is to notice if someday the silence changes. A brief history of listening. Let's go back a little further than that night in Ohio, because the story of listening to the sky didn't begin with the wow signal. It began decades earlier in a much quieter, much smaller way. In the late 1950s and into the 1960s, radio astronomy itself was still a young science. Telescopes were getting bigger, more sensitive, more capable of picking up faint whispers from deep space, not voices, but the natural radio emissions of stars, galaxies, clouds of gas drifting between them. It was in this environment, surrounded by all this new sensitivity, all this new ability to hear things that had always been there but had never been heard, that a small number of scientists began to ask a quiet, almost embarrassing question. If there is anyone else out there, and if they had technology even roughly similar to ours, might we be able to hear them by accident almost? Just by doing what we were already doing, pointing these new ears at the sky. It's worth noting how modest this idea actually was, at least at first. It wasn't about flying saucers or visitors or anything dramatic. It was closer to a thought experiment. If civilizations like ours exist elsewhere, and if some of them use radio technology the way we do, then perhaps occasionally some of that technology leaks the way a radio station's signal spreads outward, whether or not anyone is listening on the other end. And if that's true, then maybe, just maybe, some of those leaked signals traveling for thousands or millions of years across the emptiness might eventually wash past the planet like ours. Faint, old, but there. So a few astronomers began quietly to check. One of the earliest efforts pointed a radio telescope at two nearby sun-like stars for a short period, listening on a frequency associated with hydrogen, the same frequency, as it happens, that would later be close to the one recorded during the WOW signal. They heard nothing unusual, but the attempt itself was the important part. It was the first time in the history of our species that someone had built a tool specifically to ask the question, and then actually asked it. From that small, almost shy beginning, the effort grew, slowly, unevenly, with long gaps where funding dried up, or interest faded, or the technology simply wasn't good enough yet. But it never fully stopped. Over the following decades, larger and more capable searches were carried out, some scanning many stars for short periods, others staring at a smaller number of targets for much longer. Some searched a narrow slice of the radio spectrum. Others, as technology improved, searched wider and wider bands, faster and faster, processing more information in a single night than earlier searches could have managed in years. And through all of it, all these decades, all these telescopes, all this listening, the result has remained largely the same: silence. With one strange, unrepeated exception: what does nothing actually mean? Here's something I think about sometimes late at night, when a story like this one has been sitting with me for a while. When we say these searches found nothing, what do we actually mean? It's tempting to hear that word nothing as if it settles the question, as if nothing means no, as if decades of silence are decades of evidence that no one else is out there. But that's not quite right. And the reason it's not quite right is something almost everyone underestimates, even people who think about space a lot: the sheer, almost incomprehensible scale of what's actually being searched. Try this with me. Picture the night sky not as a flat ceiling of dots, but as it really is, an unimaginable depth. Stars scattered not just across the sky, but away from you, into distance, for billions of years in every direction. Now picture trying to listen to all of that. Even our most ambitious searches, the ones that sound in headlines, like they're scanning the galaxy, have in practice examined only the tiniest sliver of it. A handful of frequencies out of an enormous range that's possible. A relatively small number of stars out of the hundreds of billions in our galaxy alone. Narrow windows of time compared to the billions of years those stars have existed. Some scientists have compared it only half-jokingly to scooping a single glass of water from the ocean, finding no fish in it, and concluding the ocean has no fish. That doesn't mean the ocean does have fish. It just means a glass of water isn't enough to know either way. So when we say nothing, what we really mean is, in this very small slice of an almost incomprehensibly large search space, using the tools we've had so far, we haven't yet heard anything that fits the very specific thing we were listening for. That's not the same as silence. In the way silence sounds in a closed room, it's more like standing in the middle of a vast field at night, calling out occasionally, and not yet hearing anyone call back, while knowing, somewhere in the back of your mind, just how big that field really is. The question behind the question. I think one of the reasons stories like the WOW signal stay with people, why 50 years later people are still drawn to that single page of printout with one word circled in the margin, isn't really about aliens at all. I think it's about something much closer to home. It's about the question of whether we are alone. Not alone in the sense of being unwatched or unprotected. I don't mean that. I mean something quieter, something almost philosophical. The question of whether the particular thing that happened here, life, and then more than life, awareness, curiosity, the ability to wonder about your own existence happened only once, in one place, on one small planet, orbiting one ordinary star, in one unremarkable corner of one galaxy among countless others. If that's true, if we really are the only place where this happened, then everything we do carries a kind of weight that's hard to fully sit with. Every thought anyone has ever had, every story, every question asked at 2 a.m., staring at a ceiling, wondering what any of this means. All of it, unique, not just to us, but to the universe itself. And if it's not true, if somewhere else, on some other small world, around some other ordinary star, the same thing happened, then we're not unique in that way. But we might not be alone in another way. We might be part of something larger. Not connected necessarily, the distances are too vast for that in any practical sense, but accompanied in a sense, sharing the universe with other minds, doing the same quiet thing we're doing, looking up and wondering. Both of those possibilities are enormous, and both of them are, in their own way, a little frightening and a little comforting, depending on the night and depending on you. I don't think the search for signals from space is really about finding an answer to a scientific question, even though that's how it's usually described. I think underneath all the technical language, it's about sitting with that bigger question, the lonely one, or the accompanied one, and trying in some small way to find out which kind of universe we actually live in. Other strange nights, the wow. Signal is the most famous moment of its kind, but it isn't the only strange night in the history of listening to the sky. Over the decades, there have been other moments, smaller, quieter, less famous, but strange in their own particular ways. I want to tell you about a few of them, not because any of them solve anything, but because together they paint a picture of just how textured this silence really is. It's not a flat, empty silence. It's full of small, brief, unexplained things, most of which turn out eventually to have ordinary explanations. Most, not all. The signal that came from the ground. In the early days of one long-running search project, researchers noticed something odd. Occasionally, their instruments picked up brief, strong signals that seemed to come from a particular direction in the sky, but only at certain times of day and only on certain days of the week. That pattern tied to time of day, tied to weekdays rather than weekends, should have been a clue from the start. Natural sources from deep space, don't care what day of the week it is. But human technology does. It took some time, but eventually the source was traced not to the depths of space at all, but to a piece of equipment on the ground nearby, its signal bouncing in just the right way to appear briefly as if it were coming from somewhere else entirely. I like this story not because it's exciting, but because of what it represents, the patient, careful, sometimes slightly disappointing work of ruling things out, of looking at something strange, feeling that small spark of could this be it, and then methodically, gently taking it apart until you understand exactly what it really was. That's most of what this kind of work actually looks like. Not dramatic confirmations, not dramatic denials either. Just careful unraveling, one thread at a time, until the mystery resolves into something ordinary. But every so often, rarely, and briefly a thread doesn't unravel, and it just stays there, unresolved, like the wow signal, the repeating whisper from far away. In more recent years, within the last decade or so, a different kind of signal has captured attention, not from nearby stars, but from sources so far away that their light and their radio waves have been traveling toward us for billions of years. These are extremely brief, extremely intense bursts of radio energy lasting just a thousandth of a second, sometimes less, coming from galaxies far beyond our own. For a long time, each one seemed to be a one-time event, a brief flash, never repeated, from a source too distant and too brief to study in detail. Then scientists found something unexpected. A small number of these bursts repeat, not randomly, but in at least one case in a pattern, a rhythm, active for a period of time, then quiet for a longer period, then active again, over and over, like a kind of cosmic breathing. Now, I want to be careful here, because it's very easy for a detail like rhythm to sound late at night, like something deliberate, something built, something sending. And to be fair to your curiosity, scientists wondered about that too, at least as one possibility among many to consider and rule out. But the leading explanations point towards something natural, if extraordinarily violent, extremely dense, highly magnetic dead stars, the collapsed remains of stars far larger than our sun, undergoing intense physical processes that could, in principle, produce exactly this kind of brief, powerful, occasionally rhythmic burst. It's not a message. As far as anyone can tell, it's closer to a kind of cosmic heartbeat, vast, violent, ancient, and utterly indifferent to us. But it's also a reminder that the universe is capable of patterns, rhythms, repetitions, without anyone needing to be behind them, which makes the question, when something truly pattern-like does appear, just a little more complicated and a little more interesting. The star that dimmed, strangely. One more story, and then we'll come back to where we started. A few years ago, astronomers noticed something unusual about a particular star. Not unusually bright, not unusually close, but unusual in how its light behaved over time. Most stars, when something passes in front of them, a planet, for example, dimmed by a small, regular, predictable amount, in a regular, predictable pattern, that's actually one of the main ways planets around other stars are discovered. Tiny, repeating dips in starlight, like a very slow, very faint blink. This star didn't do that. Instead, its light dimmed sometimes by a small amount, sometimes by a startlingly large amount, up to a fifth of its total brightness at irregular times, in irregular amounts, with no clear repeating pattern at all. For a star, that's strange. Stars are, for the most part, wonderfully predictable. Even when they're variable, they tend to be variable in understandable ways. This one wasn't. And for a while, no one had a confident explanation. As you might expect, when a story like that reaches the public, one suggestion that gets attention almost as a kind of reflex is the most dramatic one. Could it be something artificial? Some enormous structure built by some advanced civilization, partially blocking the star's light in irregular ways as it operated? It's a fun thought, and to their credit, some scientists did consider it seriously enough to check, because that's how science works. You don't dismiss a possibility just because it sounds dramatic. You test it, and you let the evidence decide. And the evidence, over time, pointed elsewhere, most likely toward unusually large, irregular clumps of dust, possibly the debris of shattered objects drifting around the star in uneven patterns. Not artificial, but still, Genuinely strange, a kind of natural messiness that we don't fully understand yet, even now. I bring up this story not because it leads anywhere dramatic, but because of what it shows about how this whole field actually works. Strange observation, a wide range of possible explanations, including the exciting one, careful checking, and usually an answer that's natural but often still surprising, still not fully understood, still worth wondering about, coming back to the silence. So here we are, decades of listening, a handful of strange nights, almost all of them explained eventually in ways that are fascinating but not what we might first imagine, and just one that's never been explained at all. I think it's worth asking gently what we're supposed to do with a fact like that. I don't think the honest answer is believe something exciting happened. The evidence doesn't support a confident conclusion in either direction, and a story that asks you to believe something firmly on the strength of one unexplained data point from 50 years ago wouldn't be telling you the whole truth. But I also don't think the honest answer is it was definitely nothing. Don't think about it. Because that's not quite true either. We don't know what it was. Not we know it was nothing and have just stopped studying it. We genuinely don't know. Maybe the most honest answer and I think the most peaceful one is simply this. The universe is large enough and old enough and strange enough that not everything gets explained. Not everything resolves. Some things just happen once and then the moment passes and the universe moves on the way it always has, the way it always will. And maybe that's all right. Maybe it's even in its own quiet way a little comforting, because if the universe was small enough and simple enough that everything could be explained, every signal accounted for, every strange light understood, every mystery closed, it would also be a universe with very little room left for wonder. A universe fully mapped, fully known, finally silent in a different way, the silence of nothing left to ask. The wow signal and a handful of stories around it remind us that we don't live in that universe. We live in one that's still, after everything, a little bit open, a little bit unfinished, a little bit listening back, what it might mean to keep listening. I want to end tonight's pod with something a little more personal, not about the universe exactly, but about us. There's something I find quietly beautiful about the fact that even now, 50 years after that night in Ohio, with no second signal ever found, people are still listening. Telescopes are still pointed outward. New searches are still being designed, often by people who weren't even born when the wow signal was recorded. Why keep going after so much silence? I think the answer has less to do with expectation and more to do with values, with the kind of thing a person or a species decides is worth doing, even without a guarantee of success. There's a long human tradition of this, actually, if you think about it. People have always done things whose payoff might not arrive in their own lifetimes. Planting trees, they'll never sit beneath the full shade of. Building structures that take generations to complete. Recording knowledge in the hope that someone someday, far in the future, will read it and understand a little more than the person who wrote it down. Listening to the sky, even in silence, is a version of that. It's a kind of patience that spans not just a single life, but potentially many lives. Astronomers retiring, new ones taking their place, instruments being upgraded, replaced, improved, all in service of a question that might not be answered for a very long time, if ever. And there's something in that, in the willingness to keep doing something carefully, gently, for a very long time without needing it to pay off on any particular schedule, that feels, to me, like one of the better things about us. Not the flashy things, not the dramatic things, just the patience, the willingness to keep a small light on in case someone someday out there in the dark happens to look this way. In the next part of this story, we'll go further back, much further to a time long before radio telescopes, long before any of this technology existed, when humans first began looking up and wondering whether anyone or anything might be looking back. We'll talk about how different cultures across history imagined the sky not as empty, but as inhabited in one form or another, and what that tells us about something that seems to run very deep in us, the quiet, persistent feeling that we are being watched or waited for, or perhaps simply accompanied. But for now, let's leave it here, with the silence, with the patient instruments still listening, even tonight, even while you sleep. Somewhere, right now, a radio telescope is slowly turning with the sky, recording whatever passes through, almost certainly nothing unusual, almost certainly just the gentle, ancient hum of the universe, the same hum it's always made. And that's all right. That's most nights. That's almost every night, but not quite every night. Sleep well. And if tonight you find yourself half awake at some strange hour, looking toward a window, toward the dark outside, you might find yourself wondering just for a moment what's passing by right now in that quiet, patient, endless, dark welcome back again. By now, if you've been with us for a while, you might already be feeling that pleasant heaviness behind your eyes, the kind that means your mind is starting to loosen its grip on the day and drift towards something softer. Good. That's exactly where we want to be. Tonight, we're going to step away from telescopes and signals for a little while and go back, much further back, to a time before any of that existed. A time when the only instrument anyone had for studying the sky was their own eyes, lying on their back in the dark, looking up. The first listeners, long before anyone built a machine to listen for signals from space, people were already doing something remarkably similar, just without the machines. Think about what it must have been like tens of thousands of years ago to lie outside at night. No cities nearby, no artificial light at all, anywhere for hundreds of miles. Just darkness, and against that darkness, an almost overwhelming number of stars. Not the handful we can see today from most places, washed out by streetlights and screens, but thousands upon thousands of points of light, some bright, some faint, some clustered so densely they blurred into pale rivers across the sky. To people living in that world, the sky wasn't the backdrop. It was, in a very real sense, the largest, most detailed, most ever-present thing in their lives. It moved slowly and predictably, night after night, season after season. It was reliable in a way almost nothing else in their lives was. Storms came and went, animals migrated, seasons turned, but the stars stayed. And so, naturally, people began to do what people do with anything large, mysterious, and ever-present. They began to tell stories about it. A sky full of company. Here's something I find quietly remarkable. Almost every culture we know of, across almost every period of history, on almost every continent, looked at that same dark sky and decided it wasn't empty. Not in the sense of believing it was physically crowded with objects the way we might think of it today, but in the sense of believing it was inhabited, meaningful, connected to life down here in some way. Some cultures saw their ancestors among the stars, the idea that those who had died didn't simply disappear, but rose and joined the sky, becoming part of its permanent fabric. Looking up in that view wasn't looking at emptiness, it was looking at family, at continuity, at everyone who had come before, still present, still part of the world, just further away. Other cultures saw the stars as their homes, or the paths, or the stories of beings far greater than themselves, guardians, messengers, forces that shaped the world from above, watching over the turning of seasons, the rise and fall of rivers, the fate of crops and harvests and journeys. And many cultures, in many different ways, share the feeling that's almost impossible to translate fully into modern language, but that I think you'll recognize the moment I describe it. The feeling that the sky was watching back. Not in a frightening way, necessarily, though sometimes that too, but in the sense of being seen, of mattering, somehow, to something vast. I think that feeling is worth pausing on because it's strikingly similar in its emotional shape, if not its explanation, to the feeling behind a radio telescope quietly turning toward the same patch of sky night after night, hoping for an answer. In both cases, the same quiet hope sits underneath, that we are not simply observers of the sky, but somehow, in some way, part of a relationship with it. That looking up isn't just looking, it's reaching. Patterns in the dark, one of the most human things we do when faced with something vast and complicated is look for patterns. It's not just a habit, it might be one of the oldest survival tools we have. A pattern means something predictable. Something predictable means something you can prepare for. The sky, more than almost anything else available to ancient observers, rewarded this kind of attention. If you watched carefully, night after night, you'd notice that most stars seemed to stay in the same positions relative to each other, fixed, like a vast and unchanging painting slowly rotating overhead. But a few points of light didn't behave that way. They wandered, slowly but unmistakably, over weeks and months. They moved against the background of fixed stars, sometimes even appearing to pause, reverse direction for a while, and then continue on. These wanderers were eventually given a name that, in many ancient languages, simply meant wanderer, the origin of the word we still use today, planets. To ancient observers, this wandering wasn't just an oddity, it was significant, something that moved differently from everything else in the sky must surely be different in nature too. Many cultures associated these wandering lights with powerful beings, forces, or principles, not randomly, but specifically because of that distinctive behavior. The sky wasn't just watched, it was read the way you might read a long, slow, ongoing story written in light that unfolded over years and lifetimes. And here's the part I find especially moving. Many of these patterns, once noticed, were recorded not casually, but carefully, deliberately, sometimes across many generations. People built structures specifically aligned to mark certain positions of the sun, the moon, or particular stars on particular days of the year. Calendars were built around the sky's rhythms. Entire systems of timekeeping, agriculture, and ritual were woven around these celestial patterns, patterns that, once discovered, had to be passed down generation to generation, often without writing, simply through careful teaching and repetition. Think about what that means. Knowledge about the sky gathered slowly, painstakingly, over what may have been centuries, being deliberately preserved and handed forward by people who would never see the full span of patterns they were helping to record. Each generation adding a little more, refining a little more for the benefit of people not yet born. It's not so different, really, from a radio telescope recording data every night for decades, in case some future astronomer, perhaps not yet born, might one day look back through it and notice something everyone before them had missed. The weight of deep time. I want to shift gently towards something a little more abstract now, something that I think sits at the very heart of why stories like this one tend to feel the way they do late at night. It's the idea of deep time. Deep time is just what it sounds like. Time on a scale so large that it stops feeling like time in the ordinary sense and starts feeling more like space, like distance, like something you could, in theory, travel through, except that no one ever could, because it's simply too vast for any single life or even any single civilization to span. Here's a way to feel it rather than just think it. Imagine the entire history of the universe from its beginning to this very moment compressed into a single year. Not as a metaphor exactly, but as a kind of timeline you could actually walk along day by day. On that timeline, the universe itself begins on January 1st. Galaxies, including our own, begin forming over the following months slowly, gradually, through what would feel on this compressed timeline, like weeks and weeks of almost nothing happening. Structurally, beyond stars being born and dying, scattering the raw materials that would eventually become planets and eventually life. Our own sun and the Earth along with it doesn't even form until early September on this timeline. Roughly 2/3 of the entire year has already passed before our planet even exists. Life on Earth, the very first, simplest life, appears not long after that in geological terms, but it remains simple, microscopic, quiet for an enormous stretch of this compressed year. Months pass. Months and months on this timeline of life existing only as something small and slow, doing little more than existing. It isn't until sometime in mid-December on this same compressed timeline that anything resembling complex, visible life appears at all. The kind of life you could actually see if you were standing there. Creatures with bodies, movement, behavior, and dinosaurs which feel to us almost impossibly ancient don't appear until around December 25th on this timeline. They dominate the world for what would be, on this scale, only about 5 days before disappearing entirely on December 30th. Mammals like us begin to flourish only after that in the final day or two of the year. And humans, modern humans, the kind capable of language, art, culture, the kind capable of looking up and wondering, don't appear until the final few minutes of December 31st, not hours, minute. And everything we usually think of as history, every civilization, every war, every invention, every book ever written, every person whose name you've ever heard, fits into the final few seconds before midnight. What deep time does to a mind, I think it's worth sitting with that for a moment, not to feel small exactly, but to feel something a little more specific than small. Because here's the strange thing about deep time. It doesn't just make individual humans feel brief, it makes everything we usually think of as permanent feel brief too. Civilizations that felt to the people living in them like they would last forever. They don't even register as moments on this timeline. Entire empires, entire ways of life, entire belief systems that shaped how millions of people understood the world for centuries, all of it compresses down to less than the blink of an eye against the backdrop of everything that came before. And yet, and this is the part I think matters most, none of that makes any of it meaningless. If anything, it does something closer to the opposite. Because if the universe is old enough and large enough that almost everything that has ever happened is, in some sense, brief, then brief isn't a flaw, it's just the shape that everything takes, the shape that stars take, the shape that species take, the shape that civilizations take, the shape that thoughts take, even appearing, existing for a while, mattering intensely to whoever is having them, and then passing. Brevity on this scale isn't a tragedy. It's simply the texture of existence itself. Everything is brief compared to everything else. And somehow, within that briefness, things still manage to matter. Stars still manage to form planets. Planets still manage to form life. Life still manage, eventually, after an almost unthinkable amount of waiting, to form minds capable of looking back at all of this and feeling something about it. That feeling, whatever you want to call it, wonder, maybe, or a kind of quiet ache, is itself part of the story. It's not separate from deep time. It's one of the things deep time eventually produces after billions of years of nothing capable of feeling anything at all. Looking up across time, I want to bring this back gently to where we started tonight, to the people lying outside long ago, looking up at a sky full of stars, wondering about their place in it. In a way, those people were already engaging with deep time, even if they had no words for it and no understanding of just how deep it really went. When they looked at the stars, they were looking at light that had, in many cases, traveled for years or centuries or far longer just to reach their eyes. They were looking, without knowing it, into the past, not a metaphorical past, but a literal one. Some of the light reaching their eyes had left its source before the entire civilization existed. And tonight, when you look up, if you do, before you fall asleep, you're doing exactly the same thing, looking into the past, receiving light, and in a few rare cases, faint radio signals that began their journey long before you were born, sometimes long before anyone was born, traveling all this time through all that emptiness for no reason at all, except that physics allows it, and arriving finally here now to you. There's something in that, in the idea of something traveling for so long across such distances for no reason, and yet still eventually arriving somewhere to someone that connects. I think all the way back to where this story began, to a hillside in Ohio and a strip of paper and one word written in the margin. Maybe that's part of why that signal in particular has stayed with people for so long. Not because of what it might have been, but because of what it represents, something traveling for an unknown amount of time, across an unknown distance, for an unknown reason, and arriving briefly here to us for 72 seconds, and then continuing on into whatever comes next. In the next part, we bring these threads together: the listening, the silence, the deep time, the ancient sense of a sky that watches back, and talk about what it might actually feel like, philosophically and emotionally, to live in a universe this large, this old, and this quiet. We'll also return one more time to that night in Ohio and to the people who have spent their lives thinking about what it meant. For now, though, let the stars stay where they are, far above, doing what they've always done. Let the silence stay too. It's a good kind of silence, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. Sleep well. And if your mind drifts tonight towards something vast, let it. There's nothing out there that needs you to stay awake for it. Welcome back, or welcome if this is the first time you're hearing this voice. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Wherever you are right now, under a blanket, in the dark, the city outside, doing whatever the city does at this hour, or perhaps a quiet countryside with nothing but wind and the occasional creak of something settling, you've come to exactly the right place. Tonight is the final part of this story, and I want to take my time with it. I want to be gentle with it, because the best endings aren't really endings at all. The best endings are more like wide, open windows, the kind you leave open at night so the air can move through freely, carrying everything in, carrying everything out. This will be one of those. So let your body settle, let your shoulders drop, let your breathing find its own pace without you directing it. And come with me. We have a lot of sky to cover, the space between the stars. Before we go anywhere new tonight, I want to ask you to do something. Picture the night sky, not as a photograph, not as something you've seen on a screen. Picture it as you've actually seen it, or as you might see it if you were standing outside right now, somewhere far from any lights, on a clear night, looking up. What you'd see, if the conditions were right, is something that most people, even people who have spent their whole lives under that sky, have not truly seen more than a handful of times. Because true darkness, the kind that lets you see the sky as it really is surprisingly rare now. Most of us live surrounded by enough artificial light that the sky above us is always a little diluted, a little washed out, a few hundred stars instead of thousands, but on the right night, in the right place, the desert perhaps, or the high mountains, or far out at sea, the sky opens up in a way that changes something in the chest. Thousands upon thousands of points of light. So many that the familiar shapes and patterns you thought you knew dissolve into something too dense to read. The Milky Way, which is not a streak but a thickness, a depth, the accumulated light of hundreds of billions of stars pressing together into something you can almost feel arches overhead, like a river you could lose yourself in. And between those stars, between every pair of stars, between every cluster of light, there is darkness. Not darkness the way a room is dark when the lights go off. Not darkness that implies the presence of something in it, only unseen. The darkness between the stars is something of a different order. It is space, in the most literal and most cosmic sense, volume, vast, almost beyond any attempt to measure it, in which there is, for all practical purposes, nothing at all. The nearest star to our own sun is called Proxima Centauri. It's about 4 light years away. 4 light years. That means that light, which travels at roughly 300,000 kilometers per second, the fastest anything in the universe is permitted to move, takes 4 years to cover the distance between our sun and that nearest neighbor. 4 years of traveling at the fastest speed the universe allows, and you still haven't crossed the gap between neighbors, the nearest ones. And between here and there, essentially nothing. A handful of hydrogen atoms scattered over volumes of space so enormous that even calling them sparse feels generous. A faint whisper of magnetic fields, the occasional atom of something heavier, a carbon here, an oxygen there, drifting alone for millions of years in the cold dark between the stars. That is what space mostly is. Not stars, not planets, not light. Space. Emptiness. At a scale that genuinely exceeds what the human mind was built to hold. And yet, across that emptiness, things move. Light moves across it, taking years, centuries, millennia. Gravity reaches across it, with an arm so long it never quite runs out, pulling stars toward each other, bending the paths of everything. And radio waves, which are simply a form of light, moving at the same speed, just beyond the range your eyes can see, move across it too. Radio waves don't stop at the edge of a star system. They don't fade at the boundary of a galaxy. They travel outward in every direction, forever weakening with distance, yes, spreading themselves thinner and thinner across larger and larger spheres of space, but never truly stopping, never coming to a wall and turning back. Every radio transmission ever made on this earth, every broadcast, every signal, every navigation system, every military radar, every phone call, Every piece of data ever sent wirelessly has been leaking out into space since the moment it was generated, moving outward at the speed of light in a sphere that grows larger with every passing second. The earliest radio transmissions made by human technology are now more than 100 years away from Earth in light travel distance. A sphere of human electromagnetic noise 100 light years across, expanding into a galaxy that is about 100,000 light years wide, a sphere 100 light years wide, in a galaxy 100,000 light years across. We have leaked our presence into roughly 100,000th of our galaxy. 100,000th, and that is just our galaxy. I think about that sometimes when a story like this one is sitting in my chest, the way this one is. We are here. We have been here in this technological sense for about 100 years. We have been announcing ourselves accidentally to the universe for about 100 years, and the universe has not replied, at least not that we've heard, at least not more than once, possibly for 72 seconds in August of 1977 in Ohio. What silence might mean, the silence is not simple. I said that before in an earlier part of this story, but I want to stay with it a little longer tonight because I think it deserves more time than we gave it. When you listen to the sky for decades and hear almost nothing, when search after search, telescope after telescope, sensitive ear after sensitive ear turns toward the dark and hears only the ancient hiss of the universe's own background, what does that actually mean? There are several answers, and none of them are simple, and none of them, when you really sit with them, are entirely comfortable. But discomfort, I think, is sometimes worth choosing late at night when the mind is soft enough to hold things that the daylight hours tend to push away. The first possible answer is the most obvious one and the most unsettling. Perhaps we are alone. Perhaps in a galaxy of hundreds of billions of stars, around which we now know orbit hundreds of billions of planets, the specific sequence of events that led to life and then to complex life and then to intelligent life and then to technological civilizations capable of sending and receiving signals has so far happened only once. Here, us. This possibility, the one sometimes called the Great Silence, has a name given to it by a physicist named Enrico Fermi, who reportedly asked at lunch one day in 1950 a very simple question. If the galaxy is this old and this large, and even a fraction of its stars have planets, and even a fraction of those planets are suitable for life, where is everybody? It's known as the Fermi paradox. And it's a genuinely difficult question to answer because the numbers on their face suggest that civilization should be everywhere. The galaxy is 10 billion years old. Even if technological civilizations are extremely rare, 1 in a billion stars, say there should still be in a galaxy of hundreds of billions of stars, hundreds of them. And even a civilization 1,000,000 years more advanced than ours, an eye blink in cosmic terms, would have had more than enough time to spread at least its signals across the entire galaxy many times over. So where are they? Why haven't we heard anything? The silence in the face of those numbers is either telling us something genuinely profound or hiding something we haven't yet found, or both. The second possible answer is the one we touched on before, that the silence isn't really silence at all, but simply incompleteness, that we've searched too little of too small a part of the spectrum, aimed at too few targets for too short a time to draw any conclusions at all from what we haven't found. This answer is honest. It's probably in part correct. but it also comes with its own discomfort, the discomfort of not knowing and of understanding that we may not know for a very long time. Perhaps not in our lifetimes, perhaps not for generations. There is a patience required by that answer, the kind of patience that asks you to hold a question lightly without needing to grip it and force it open, to let it sit and breathe and be what it is, a question without demanding that it become an answer on your schedule. That kind of patience is a spiritual quality as much as an intellectual one, the willingness to dwell in uncertainty without being destroyed by it. The third possible answer is the one that, to me, is the most quietly beautiful and the most compatible with the deepest kind of wonder. It is simply this, that the universe is larger and stranger and more varied in its ways than our current categories allow us to understand, that the silence might not be emptiness, that it might be full of things we don't yet know how to hear, or full of things that communicate in ways we haven't yet imagined, or full of forms of existence so different from our own that the question, are they sending signals, is like asking whether the ocean sends signals technically answerable, but answering the wrong thing. This isn't a comfortable answer either. It asks you to hold your own categories loosely, to acknowledge that the way we currently understand intelligence and communication and civilization might be very specific to us, specific to our size, our time scale, our chemistry, our evolutionary history, and that the universe is not required to produce other things that resemble us closely enough for our instruments to recognize. But this answer also opens something. It says, what we've heard and what we haven't may not be the whole story, may not even be the beginning of the whole story. The universe is not obligated to be legible to the particular set of senses we arrived with. And there is something genuinely humbling about that, something that sits well with a mind that is trying in the dark to find its proper size in the world. The astronomers of another era, I want to take you somewhere specific now, not to Ohio and not to a radio telescope, somewhere older than that, somewhere that smells of dust and ink and something faintly like smoke, in the way that places with fires in them always carry that smell into the stone walls, long after the fires are gone. I want to take you to a city many centuries ago, where a man is working by lamplight late into the night, bent over a set of instruments he has built himself, or had built to his precise specifications, measuring angles. He has measured 1,000 times before, checking numbers against numbers, building up a picture of the sky that is more precise, more detailed, more carefully reasoned than anything anyone in his part of the world has ever attempted before. He is not doing this casually. He is doing this with the kind of total attention that looks from the outside like obsession, the kind that makes a person forget to eat, forget the hour, forget the cold. He is doing it because he believes, genuinely and deeply, that the sky is worth understanding, that the universe, what he would not have called the universe, but might have called the created world or the visible heavens, is ordered and lawful and beautiful, and that understanding it is not an act of arrogance, but an act of gratitude, a form of witness, a way of looking at something made with extraordinary precision and care and honoring it by paying close attention. There were many such people across many centuries and many parts of the world. But I want to stay for a moment with one era in particular, because it is an era that tends to get left out of the stories we tell about science in the sky, and it deserves not to be. Between roughly the 8th century and the 14th, in a vast arc of cities stretching from Baghdad to Cordoba to Samarkand, the most advanced astronomical work in the world was being done by Muslim scholars, not casually, not incidentally, with full institutional support, with observatories funded by rulers who understood that precision astronomy had practical value for navigation, for the determination of prayer times, for the calculation of the direction of the Qibla from any location on earth, but also with a spirit of inquiry that went well beyond the merely practical. These scholars translated the ancient Greek texts, but they didn't stop there. They corrected them. They checked Ptolemy's measurements against their own, and where Ptolemy was wrong, they said so. They built instruments of extraordinary refinement, armillary spheres, astrolabes, mural quadrants, instruments for measuring the positions of stars with a precision that would not be surpassed in Europe for centuries. They cataloged stars. They gave them names. Many of those names, Aldebaran, Betelgeuse, Rigel, Vega, Fomalhaut, Deneb are Arabic, and you still use them today every time you talk about the night sky without necessarily knowing where those names came from. They measured the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy using nothing but geometry in the shadow of the sun. They calculated the tilt of the earth's axis. They tracked the motion of planets across decades, looking for the patterns underneath the patterns. And they did all of this because looking carefully at the sky felt like a religious obligation, not a departure from one. The universe, in this understanding, was not an arbitrary collection of matter. It was something made with intention, full of signs, for those who took the time to look. The Arabic word for these signs is ayat. It is the same word used for the verses of the Quran. The stars, in this understanding, are verses. The cosmos is a book, and reading it, really reading it, carefully, humbly, with instruments in hand and the willingness to correct yourself when you're wrong, is a form of worship. I find something in that understanding that I think is worth carrying with you late at night when you're listening to a story about a radio telescope listening to the sky, hoping for a reply from somewhere it doesn't fully understand. Because what those medieval astronomers were doing with their lamplight and their instruments and their careful calculations was essentially the same thing, paying close attention to the sky on the assumption that paying close attention is worthwhile, especially when you don't know exactly what you'll find, the mathematics of the sky. There's a question I want to ask you now. Not a hot question, not a question that requires any knowledge of mathematics or science, just a question to sit with gently as you drift. Why does the universe obey laws? Not which laws and not how those laws work. We've been building up to those questions for centuries, and we're still at it. And the details are fascinating, but not what I mean right now. I mean, why is there any lawfulness at all? Why is the universe not simply chaos, random, unpredictable, ungoverned, a space where things happen for no consistent reason and nothing can be relied upon to repeat? You might say, well, it just is that way. Physics exists, laws exist. That's just how things turned out. But that answer is, in a quiet way, extraordinary, because it didn't have to be that way. There's no logical necessity that the universe contain laws. There is no reason that we can point to from the outside why the speed of light should be constant, or why gravity should follow an inverse square law, or why the charge of an electron should be exactly what it is, or why any of the dozens of fundamental constants of physics should have the values they have. They could, as far as anyone can demonstrate, have been different values, different laws, a different set of relationships between things. And if they were different in most of the ways they could plausibly be different, the universe that resulted would not contain stars or planets or chemistry or life. The specific set of laws and constants we have, the ones that allow hydrogen to form and galaxies to coalesce and suns to burn and carbon to bond in the particular ways it bonds, and water to be liquid at the temperatures it's liquid, and proteins to fold the ways they fold this specific set is, in the language of physics, extraordinarily fine-tuned for complexity, for the existence of things, for the existence of beings capable of asking why. Scientists have different ways of responding to this observation. Some say there may be many universes with many different sets of laws, and we simply find ourselves in one where the laws allow us to exist because we couldn't find ourselves anywhere else. Others say the apparent fine-tuning might be explainable by some deeper theory we haven't found yet. Others hold the question lightly as a genuine open mystery. But many people across many traditions, across many centuries, including many scientists, have found in this observation something that feels like a signal, not a radio signal, and not something you can put in a paper, but something quieter. A sense that the lawfulness of the universe, its deep mathematical structure, its openness to being understood by minds that emerged within it, all of this is pointing at something, not nothing. Something. The mathematician and physicist Paul Dirac, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, a man who spent his career in some of the driest and most technical areas of theoretical physics, wrote late in his life something that has stayed with me. He wrote that it seemed to him that God had used mathematics of extraordinary beauty in creating the universe. He was not a man given to poetic statements. He was, by most accounts, one of the most austere and precise thinkers of the 20th century, a man who, when he said something, meant exactly that thing and nothing more. And what he said was that the mathematical structure of the universe is extraordinarily beautiful, not just functional, not just useful, beautiful. There's a kind of mathematics that physicists call elegant, not because it is decorative, but because it achieves something vast with something minimal. An equation that, with a few symbols, captures a relationship that turns out to describe an enormous range of phenomena with precision, the kinds of equations that, when you first see them, make physicists say in a way they can't fully justify but can't deny either that this feels right, that this has the texture of something true. And when you look at the fundamental equations of physics, the ones that describe how light behaves, how gravity curves space-time, how quantum fields give rise to particles, they have this quality, not despite their being abstract and mathematical, but through it. They feel, to those who understand them, like something that was found rather than invented, like something that was already there, waiting to be read, like verses, perhaps, in a very old, very large book. The people who keep listening, let's come back to Earth for a moment. Specifically, let's come back to the kind of people who spend their careers pointing instruments at the sky and listening, knowing most nights that they will hear nothing unusual. I've been thinking about what it takes to do that, what kind of character it asks for. Because there's a common image of the scientist in stories about the search for other worlds that tends toward the dramatic, the breathless phone call at 3 a.m, the rush to confirm, the press conference, the moment when everything changes. And those moments, when they come, are real. The wow signal was a real moment. The first detection of gravitational waves, a few years ago, the first time humanity heard two black holes colliding a billion light years away, a faint chirp lasting less than a second, detected by instruments of almost incomprehensible precision, that was a real moment too. But those moments are surrounded by years, decades, entire careers that are, in their texture, almost entirely unremarkable. The people doing this work wake up and go to work and run their instruments and check the data and find nothing unusual and go home. And they come back the next day and the next, not because they're certain they'll find something. Many of them, honestly, aren't certain. They operate in a sustained professional uncertainty. They think there's a reasonable chance something is out there. They think the search is worth doing, but they would not bet their lives on finding it in their lifetime. Most of them don't expect to. Not really. And yet they keep going. I think the reason is something simpler and more human than we usually give credit for. I think most of them keep going because the work itself feels important. Not important in the sense of likely to succeed, important in the sense of being the right thing to be doing, worth doing for its own sake, worth doing because the question is real and someone needs to be asking it, and the asking is itself a kind of honor paid to the universe. There's a word for this in many traditions: vocation, a calling that isn't primarily about outcomes, a work that matters not just if it succeeds, but in the act of its doing. I think the people who listen to the sky are, in some ways, degrees in a very old tradition. They are doing what the astronomers of Baghdad and Cordoba and Samarkand were doing 1,000 years ago. They are paying close attention to something vast and strange and not fully understood, on the assumption that paying close attention is the right thing to do. Whether or not they ever find what they're looking for, the fragility of signals, here is something to hold lightly in the dark. The wow signal lasted 72 seconds. 72 seconds and then nothing. But here is something that doesn't often get said about it. The reason the signal was only detectable for 72 seconds has nothing to do with how long the signal itself existed. The telescope Big Ear in Ohio didn't rotate. Instead, as the Earth turned beneath it, different parts of the sky came into its field of view and then slowly drifted out again. Any given point in the sky would pass through the telescope's field of view in approximately 72 seconds. So what the record tells us is not that the signal existed for 72 seconds and then stopped. It tells us that the signal, if it came from a fixed point in the sky, was exactly as bright and as long as you would expect it to be, given how the telescope worked. Which means it may have been going on for much longer than 72 seconds, may have been going on for minutes before the telescope's field of view reached it, may have still been going on after the telescope moved past it, may conceivably have been going on for years, or it may not have been. It may truly have been brief, a pulse, a burst, something transient. We simply don't know. This is one of the things that makes the wow signal so difficult to classify. We caught a glimpse of it, one glimpse. And everything we think we know about it is built on that single 72-second window. It's a little like walking past a lit window at night, hearing a fragment of music through the glass, a few bars, just enough to tell that it's music and not noise, just enough to catch the shape of a melody, and then walking on and never being able to find that window again, and spending years wondering what the full piece sounded like. You caught something real. Of that, you're almost certain, but what the full version of it was, whether it was long or short, simple or complex, repeating or unique, you simply don't know. And you might never know. And the not knowing has to be okay. The ocean of time. I want to go somewhere different for a while. Not outward into space, but inward, almost into something harder to visualize and in some ways more disorienting. Time. We spoke about deep time in the earlier part of this story, the kind of time that makes 1 billion years feel small. But I want to try tonight to actually feel it rather than just describe it. Here is an exercise I want to try with you. Your parents were born. Before them, their parents were born. Before them, their parents' parents. Each generation back in time is roughly 20 to 30 years. Let's say a generation. Go back 100 generations and you are in the era of ancient empires. Early writing, the construction of the first large cities, still fully human, still us, the same species, the same basic minds, the same capacity for love and grief and wonder. 100 generations back. Go back 1,000 generations and you are among the first modern humans in Europe, living through the last ice age, painting caves with images of aurochs and horses and handprints that still exist today, preserved in the cold, dark, waiting to be found tens of thousands of years later by their descendants. Go back 10,000 generations, and modern humans have only recently emerged as a species. The world looks different in almost every surface detail. The coastlines are shaped differently. Vast ice sheets cover the north. The animals around you include creatures that have long since vanished, but the people themselves, the minds, the capacity for language and tool use and complex social bonds, that is already there, already fully human. And 10,000 generations is roughly 200,000 years. A long time by human standards, but in the story of life on this planet, 200,000 years is less than a breath. Life has been here for approximately 4 billion years. That is 20 million generations of humans. If humans had been here for all of it, which they haven't, we've been here for less than 1/10,000th of the time that life has existed on this earth. Less than 1/10,000th. And the earth itself is roughly 4.5 billion years old. And the universe is roughly 13.5 billion years old. 13.5 billion years. If a single human lifetime, roughly 80 years, is one page of a book, then the age of the universe would fill a stack of books roughly 170 million pages high. Our entire recorded history, everything from the first city to this moment, fills the last half of the very last page. We are, in time, the most recent of newcomers. We have been watching the sky, in the technical sense, for less time than a single pixel in that impossible stack of pages. What does it mean to look for something, to listen for something, when you have been present for such a vanishingly small sliver of the time in which whatever you're looking for might have existed? It means that absence of evidence is very far from evidence of absence. It means that if signals have been sent, and if they originated from civilizations that existed 1 billion years ago, or 500 million years ago, or even 100 million years ago, we weren't here to hear them. We couldn't have heard them. We hadn't arrived yet. And if signals were sent and are still being sent, how long must they have been searching without a reply from us? How long might they have been sending before we had the technology to notice? How long might they wait before concluding that this particular small planet around this particular ordinary star is simply quiet? Or how long might they have already been listening and finding us 100 years of electromagnetic leakage spreading outward at light speed, too faint and too new to be sure of? The ocean of time swallows certainties. What remains after the certainties are gone is something more like wonder and patience, and the continued, stubborn, almost beautiful act of keeping the instruments on and the lights on and the question open, what a signal would mean. Let's imagine something together, not as a prediction, not as a belief, just as an imaginative exercise, the kind you're allowed to do at night when the mind is loose and the day is behind you. Imagine that tomorrow morning, or next year, or a decade from now, someone, some astronomer at some telescope, some engineer monitoring some data stream, finds something that doesn't fit, something that, like the wow signal, is too focused, too strong, too specific to be explained by any known natural source. And unlike the wow signal, this one repeats. And unlike the wow signal, this one can be confirmed by other telescopes in other places all seeing the same thing at the same time. Something real. Something that means, however carefully and provisionally you stated, that we are not alone. What would that moment feel like? Not to the scientists necessarily, though that would be extraordinary, but to you, to the person hearing it on the radio in their car, or reading it on their phone while eating breakfast, or hearing it from someone they love. I think it would feel, for most people, like two things simultaneously, like a door opening and like the ground shifting. A door opening. Because one of the oldest and largest questions human beings have ever asked, are we alone, would have received at least partially some kind of reply. The universe, which has been silent for as long as we've been listening, would have spoken. Whatever it said, however strange, however incomplete, however impossible to fully interpret it, would have said something, and the ground shifting. Because everything we take for granted about our place in things, every assumption we've quietly held about being the only ones or the important ones, or the ones the story is really about, would need to be reconsidered. Not abandoned, not disproven, just held more loosely. There's a word in Arabic and in many other languages too, but the Arabic word has a particular quality. I want to bring to this moment the word wajd. It describes a feeling that arrives sometimes in moments of deep contemplation, or encounters something between awe and being moved, almost vertigo, at finding yourself in the presence of something vast. It is not a comfortable feeling. It is not an uncomfortable one either. It is simply the feeling of encountering a scale of things that exceeds your current categories. I think a confirmed signal from beyond this planet would produce something like wajd. A feeling that there is more here than you had accounted for, which is, in the end, also the feeling of the best kind of discovery. The kind that doesn't answer a question so much as open a larger space for it. The night sky as a mirror. There's something I've been meaning to say for a while, and I think this is the right moment. The night sky has always been, for human beings, as much a mirror as a window. What I mean is, the stories we tell about what's out there reveal something about what's in here, about us, about what we hope for and what we fear and what we're capable of imagining. When ancient peoples looked up and saw the sky populated by beings who resembled them, who loved and argued and created and destroyed, who had fates and relationships and stories, they were, among other things, expressing something true about themselves, that they were a kind of animal that needed stories to live by, that the sky, the largest canvas available, was the natural place to paint the stories that mattered most. When medieval astronomers saw in the orderliness of the heavens a reflection of divine intelligence, lawful, precise, beautiful, purposeful, they were expressing something true too, that the human mind is one that seeks meaning in pattern, that the discovery of law and order in the natural world feels to us like the discovery of something placed there, like reading. And when modern astronomers point their instruments at the sky and ask whether anyone else is out there, whether there are other minds looking up from other planets, asking the same question, they are expressing something that might be the most fundamentally human thing of all. The longing not to be alone, not the fear of being alone, exactly. The longing not to be, there's a difference, and the difference matters late at night. Fear of being alone is a contracted thing. It folds inward. It makes you smaller. Longing not to be alone is an expansive thing. It reaches outward. It makes you larger, not because the longing is always answered, but because it is the act of reaching, of wondering, of caring whether someone might be there. The search for signals from space is, at its heart, an expression of that longing. We are reaching. We may not hear anything back, but the reaching itself is real. And the universe, whatever it contains, receives the reaching, the pale blue dot. In 1990, the spacecraft Voyager 1, which had been launched in 1977, the same year as the wow signal was far enough from Earth that a scientist named Carl Sagan asked the engineers controlling it to do something unusual. He asked them to turn the camera around, to point it back toward the sun, and in the process toward Earth. From a distance of about 6 billion kilometers, well beyond the orbit of Neptune, near the edge of the solar system, Voyager turned its camera back toward home, and in the resulting image, the Earth appears as a tiny, faint dot of light, less than a pixel across, suspended in a beam of scattered sunlight that makes it look slightly blue. Apparaît bleu dot. Carl Sagan wrote about this image in a way that I think deserves to be returned to again and again, especially late at night when the mind is open. He wrote that it underscored, in his view, our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. I am not going to repeat his full words here because those words are his and they deserve to be sought out and read directly. But I want to sit with the central idea. From 6 billion kilometers away, this entire planet, all of its oceans and mountains and cities and people and history and love and grief and achievement and failure, is a single faint point of light, smaller than a pixel, barely there. And from 100 light years away, which is still, remember, an almost negligibly small fraction of the distance across just our galaxy, we would not be visible at all. Not to any instrument we currently possess. We would be simply nothing. A point of light indistinguishable from the star it orbits, far too faint to see. And from 1 million light years away, our galaxy itself would be a small, faint smudge. And from the other side of the universe, from a source at the edge of the observable cosmos, our entire galaxy would be invisible. This is the scale of things. And yet, here we are, on this pale blue dot, breathing, thinking, building instruments to listen with, writing down what we find, telling stories about it, at night, to each other. The contrast between how vast the universe is and how small we are, set against the fact that we are able to understand any of this at all, that is not a sad thing. It is an astonishing one. The scale of the universe is not an argument against the value of any of this. It is, if anything, the opposite, a measure of how extraordinary it is that value exists at all, anywhere in a universe this large. The music of the spheres, the ancient Greeks had a concept passed down through the medieval Islamic scholars, passed down through the Renaissance, passed down to us called the music of the spheres. The idea that the movements of the planets and stars were not just orderly, but in some sense harmonic. That the ratios of their distances, their periods, their relationships to one another expressed something musical, something beautiful, in a way that music is beautiful, not just pleasant to hear, but structurally profound, revealing a relationship that felt, once you perceived it, inevitable. Now, the original idea was not literally correct. The planets don't make sounds as they orbit. Space doesn't carry sound waves. The numbers don't quite work out the way the ancient philosophers hoped. But the instinct behind it, the intuition that the universe has a kind of deep harmony to it, that its structures are in some sense beautiful and not just functional, that there's an aesthetic quality to creation. This instinct has turned out to be, in certain important ways, pointing at something real, because the universe does, in fact, have harmonics. Sound is vibration, and while space doesn't carry sound, it carries light. And light electromagnetic radiation comes in frequencies. And frequencies in their ratios and relationships follow mathematical structures that physicists who study them find repeatedly and somewhat helplessly beautiful. The spectrum of light from a heated object follows a curve of extraordinary mathematical elegance. The way electrons in atoms emit light at specific frequencies, producing the characteristic spectral lines that allow us to identify elements in stars from billions of light years away, is governed by equations so clean and so precise that physicists have, for a century now, struggled to convey to non-physicists just how strange it is that anything should work this way. And the cosmic microwave background, that faint radio glow left over from the very beginning of the universe, a kind of afterglow from the birth of everything, contains in its slight temperature variations a pattern that, when plotted, reveals the harmonic structure of the early universe. Compressions and expansions of the early plasma oscillating like sound waves, frozen in place when the universe became transparent. The universe's first notes, preserved in the oldest light we can see. In a very real sense, the universe has been singing since the very beginning. We have only recently built ears sensitive enough to hear it. Back to Ohio, I want to go back one more time to that night in Ohio. Not to analyze it again, not to go over what we know and don't know. We've done that. I want to go back to it imaginatively, as a place and a moment and a human experience. It's August 1977. The observatory is running its regular survey. Jerry Ammon is a volunteer, not even a full-time employee of the project. He is going through printout pages, checking data, doing the quiet and unpaid work that this kind of science requires in enormous quantities. The careful attention of someone who believes the work matters, even if it's never going to be glamorous. He finds the numbers on the page. He circles them. He writes, "Wow," in the margin. And then, and this is the part I keep coming back to, he sets the page aside and continues with his work. He doesn't call a press conference. He doesn't declare anything. He knows what he has, and he knows what he doesn't have. He has a signal that doesn't fit, and he doesn't yet have any way of knowing what it is. So he writes his one-word note, documents what he saw, and continues. That combination of excitement and restraint, of being genuinely moved and genuinely careful at the same time, of writing wow and then continuing to look, this to me is one of the most human moments in the whole story, because that's what actual wonder looks like. Not abandoning caution, not throwing out everything you know, not demanding that a single anomaly mean everything you want it to mean. Just, this is remarkable. I will note it carefully, and I will continue. There's a practice there that goes beyond science. It's a way of being in the world, being open enough to be surprised, and grounded enough to stay with the surprise rather than be swept away by it. What the search is really searching for. I have been circling something for a while in this story, and I think now, near the end, is the right time to say it directly. The search for signals from other worlds is, at one level, exactly what it says, an attempt to determine whether other technological civilizations exist in the universe by looking for evidence of their technology. But at another level, the level that's harder to talk about in scientific papers, but that I think motivates the work more deeply than anything else, the search is also about this planet, about us, about what we choose to pay attention to. And why? Because here is the thing, the search has so far found almost nothing, and yet it continues. And that continuation, the decision to keep listening year after year in the absence of any positive result, is itself a statement about values. It's a statement that some questions are worth asking even without the expectation of an answer. that some kinds of attention are worth sustaining even without reward. That turning your most careful instruments toward the vast, silent unknown and listening with everything you have is a worthwhile act in itself, not just if it succeeds. I think there's a reason that feels true beyond just the intellectual case for it. It is because the quality of a civilization, the quality of any individual life, really is measured not only by what it finds, but by what it bothers to look for. A civilization that never looks up, that is too busy, too afraid, too certain it already knows what's there, is poorer for it. Not materially poorer, but poorer in something harder to name, in the quality of its attention, in the breadth of its wonder. And a civilization that looks up, even in silence, even without receiving a reply, is practicing something, is maintaining something, is keeping alive in itself a capacity that matters enormously, the capacity to be genuinely curious about what lies beyond its current knowledge. That capacity, curiosity that is humble enough to know it might not get an answer and patient enough to keep asking anyway, is among the most precious things any mind can cultivate. The question of meaning. I want to slow down here and be careful and honest, because this story has been circling questions that are not only scientific, they are questions that touch on something much older and much more personal. Is there anything out there? And if there is, does it change what things mean? Does the discovery of other minds, other worlds, other kinds of awareness in the universe change the significance of this world, of this life? I want to say as clearly as I can, I don't think so. And here's why. Meaning is not a quantity that gets divided among those who possess it. If you learn that 1,000 other people love the piece of music you love, it does not divide your love by 1,000. If anything, it deepens it to know that what moves you also moves others in their own distinct ways, is an enrichment, not a dilution. If there are other minds in the universe, other forms of awareness on other worlds, contemplating their own existence, wondering about theirs the way we wonder about ours, that does not make this world less meaningful, does not make any life lived here less precious, does not change the weight of a single grief or the brightness of a single joy. What it might do, if anything, is give meaning a context, a frame, a reminder that awareness, the ability to experience and to wonder, is not the accident it might seem to be when you look only at this one small planet, that it is perhaps something the universe is capable of producing under the right conditions in many places. And that in itself is something astonishing, something that I think deepens rather than diminishes the strangeness and preciousness of being aware at all. To be the kind of being that wonders about its own existence, that looks up at the sky and asks whether anyone is there, is remarkable. It was remarkable when you were the only being doing it, and it remains remarkable if you discover you're not. Maybe more so because a universe that is capable of producing wonder in multiple places, in multiple forms, is a more astonishing universe than one that did it only once. The nearest things, let me bring you close for a moment, very close, not to the stars, not to the ancient sky, not to the mysteries of the outer dark, to right here, to the room you're in, because while we've been talking about signals from the depths of space and ancient astronomers and the mathematics of the heavens, there's been something quietly extraordinary going on in this room, in this moment, all along. You are awake, or almost awake, or in that dissolving space between the two, where the thoughts start losing their sharp edges and things begin to flow into each other without you quite deciding they should. And while you've been there in that particular state, which is one of the most intimate states a person can be in, you've been hearing about things 13 billion years old, about signals that travel through the void for an unknown amount of time, about people who spent decades of their lives listening for something they might never hear. And all of that enormous, time-soaked, universe-spanning content has been arriving in a room. In a specific room with its specific walls and its specific light or its specific dark, and whatever sounds reach you from outside the city or the rain or the quiet. Everything I've described tonight has arrived here into this room. The universe, which is so vast that the human mind cannot fully hold its size, it arrived here into this small space and somehow fit, not in its entirety, of course, but in something, in the sense of it, in the feeling, which I hope you have, of having been somewhere large tonight. That is not a small thing. That is actually one of the most remarkable things that regularly happens on this planet. Vast distances collapsing into an intimate space, the enormous being held carefully by the small, a mind reading a message from a star, a person in a room late at night holding the universe for a while, light that has been traveling. There is light reaching you right now from the sun. Not this moment the sun has set, if it is night for you, which it probably is, but the light in your room, whatever light there is from a lamp, from a screen, from the glow of a city outside your window, all of it traces back in some chain of transformations to sunlight, to nuclear reactions happening in the core of our sun, reactions that release energy in the form of photons, particles of light that fight their way through the dense plasma of the sun's interior, a journey that can take hundreds of thousands of years just to reach the surface and then travel outward at light speed, reaching Earth in about 8 minutes. 8 minutes from the sun to you, after hundreds of thousands of years inside the sun. And when that light arrives, when it hits the retina of your eye, when it triggers the chemical changes that your brain interprets as vision, it carries in it, in some small way, the record of conditions in the sun's interior. The specific spectrum of the light, the mixture of colors, is shaped by the elements in the sun and the temperature at its surface. You can, if you have the right instruments, read the sun from its light the way you might read a letter. Every star in the sky sends light that carries this kind of information. Every galaxy, every distant object we can see has been sending us light for as long as it has existed, light that arrives eventually at our instruments or our eyes, and that can, with enough care and the right tools, be read. The universe has been writing to us in light since before we were here to read it. We have only recently learned to read, and what we've found in that reading has been extraordinary, that the universe is ordered and vast and old and strange and full of processes that make human lifetimes look like the blink of an eye. And that somewhere in all of it, on one small water-covered world around one ordinary star, something happened that has never, as far as we know, happened anywhere else in our vicinity. Something became aware and looked up and wondered and built instruments to wonder more precisely, and found once for 72 seconds something it couldn't explain, and kept listening. The radio astronomers tonight, while you're reading this, while your eyes move across these words, or while your ears carry the story into whatever soft, almost sleeping place you're in somewhere, there is a telescope listening, not the same one. Big ear, the telescope that recorded the WOW. Signal is gone. The land it was on was sold in 1997, and the telescope was demolished to make way for a golf course. in a decision that was perhaps not history's finest, but the spirit of it continues elsewhere. Other telescopes, larger and more sensitive, turn their ears toward the sky tonight. Some are dedicated to searching for artificial signals specifically. Others do it as one part of a broader range of work. All of them are accumulating data night after night that might contain something unusual, a signal that doesn't fit, a pattern where there should be randomness, a message in a language no one yet knows how to read. Most of that data will reveal nothing unusual, almost all of it, in fact. But all of it gets recorded. All of it goes into archives that will exist in theory, at least for as long as anyone is interested enough to maintain them. And in those archives, perhaps something is already waiting, not yet recognized, not yet understood, a 72-second anomaly that hasn't been read yet because no one has had the time to look at that particular page. Or perhaps not. Perhaps the archives contain only what they appear to contain. The patient, vast, almost entirely uneventful hiss of the universe, doing what it has always done, indifferent to whether anyone is listening. Both of those possibilities are real. And both of them, in the dark, in the quiet, are somehow easier to sit with than they are in the daylight, which is why these stories belong to the night. Signals we might never recognize. Here's a thought that keeps me honest when I find myself too certain about any of this. We are listening for radio waves. Specifically, we are mostly listening for radio waves at certain frequencies coming from certain directions with certain characteristics that we associate with either natural sources or artificial ones. But radio technology on this planet is roughly 130 years old. It is one of the earliest technologies we developed for communication at a distance. It is, in the history of what might be possible, almost certainly not the last. Already in our own civilization, the way we communicate is shifting. The amount of directed radio communication, sharp beams of signals sent from one specific place to another, is growing. The amount of undirected leakage, the old broadcast radio and television that used to spray signals in all directions, is actually decreasing. We are becoming, in radio terms, quieter as our technology matures. A civilization 1,000,000 years more advanced than ours, which is, as I said before, an eye blink in cosmic terms, might communicate in ways that don't resemble radio at all, might use technology that we haven't yet imagined that wouldn't register on any instrument we currently have, might communicate through something so efficient, so focused, so completely unlike what we're listening for, that it would pass through our instruments invisibly, unnoticed, the way a radio wave passes through a rock without being absorbed or reflected. We might be surrounded by communication and have no idea. That's not a paranoid thought. It's just an honest one. We are looking for something specific, and the universe is not required to produce it in the specific form we're looking for. The silence, then, might not be absence. It might simply be the gap between what we can hear and what's actually being said. A gap that our descendants, if they are patient and curious and careful enough, might someday close. The names we give to things. I want to talk for a moment about names. When astronomers find something new, a newly detected star, a newly confirmed planet, a newly observed phenomenon, they give it a name. Sometimes the names are technical, strings of letters and numbers that encode the object's coordinates, its date of discovery, its catalog number. These names are precise and useful and almost entirely unlovely, but sometimes for objects that deserve it, for discoveries that carry weight, the names are more than that. The wow signal got its name from a word written in a margin. Informal, immediate human. The Very Large Array, the network of radio telescopes in New Mexico, got its name from a description that manages to be both completely literal and somehow endearing. It is, in fact, a very large array, Proxima Centauri, the star I mentioned earlier. The nearest one beyond our sun means, in Latin, the nearest of the centaurs. It was given that name because it lies in the direction of the constellation Centaurus, a mythological name, a name that connects modern astrophysics to ancient stories. The Milky Way comes from the ancient Greek Galaxias, Kyklos, the Milky Circle, named for how it looked to people lying on their backs in the dark thousands of years ago. The same thing you might see if you're somewhere dark enough. And many individual stars, as I mentioned, have Arabic names, names that were given by people who paid exquisite attention to the sky over centuries for reasons that were scientific and practical and spiritual all at once. Aldebaran, the follower, named because it follows the Pleiades across the sky. Betelgeuse, from an Arabic phrase that may refer to the shoulder of the central figure, the giant in the constellation Orion. Rigel, the foot, the bright foot of Orion. These names are layers. They carry the sediment of attention accumulating over centuries. When you say the name of a star, when you say Aldebaran or Vega or Fomalhaut, you are, without knowing it, speaking a word that passed through the minds and mouths of astronomers in medieval Baghdad or Andalusia or Cairo who were paying close attention to the same sky you're under tonight. The names are a connection across time, across culture, across the distance between a person lying under a dark sky 1,000 years ago and a person lying in a room tonight. The sky hasn't changed. The stars have barely moved. The attention is the same. The question children ask, there's a question that children ask sometimes that adults have mostly forgotten how to ask. They look at the sky, or they look at the photograph of a galaxy, or they see a documentary about the size of the universe, and they ask, in their specific, no-nonsense way, is there anyone else out there? Not what is the probability of life elsewhere in the universe given our current understanding of astrobiology. Not how should we weight the various solutions to the Fermi paradox. Just, is there anyone else out there? And the honest answer, the most honest answer a careful, thoughtful person can give is, we don't know. That answer can feel to adults like a failure, like a non-answer, like something that should be improved upon, expanded, qualified, turned into something more useful. But I think the child's answer is better because the child, on hearing we don't know, tends to respond in one of two ways. Either they accept it, take it at face value, and move on, in which case they've internalized something true and important about the world, that not everything is known, and that's fine. Or they keep asking, they ask, but what do you think? And that's the question that forces honesty. What do I think? I think the universe is old enough and large enough and complex enough that it would be a very strange kind of universe if everything that had ever happened in it, every form of awareness, every kind of mind, every experience of wonder had happened only once on one small planet in one corner of one galaxy. I think the silence we've heard so far is too small a sample to mean very much. I think the wow signal, whatever it was, is a reminder that the universe is capable of surprising us, that the data sometimes contains things that don't fit, that the expected and the unexpected are not as clearly separated as we tend to assume. And I think the question is worth keeping, worth carrying with you, not as an anxiety, but as a kind of permanent, gentle openness, because the question of whether anyone is out there is connected at its root to the question of who you are and what this is and what it means to be the kind of being that looks up and wonders, those questions don't need answers to be valuable. They need to be kept alive. What comes after the signal, here's the part of the story that almost no one tells. Because usually the story stops at the signal, the discovery, if there were a discovery, the moment of wow writ large, the confirmation, the announcement, the world pausing to take it in. But what would come after? What would it actually mean in practice, in the years and decades following a confirmed detection, not a proof of consciousness, not a greeting, not a translated message, but simply an undeniable signal, artificial in origin, from somewhere beyond our solar system? The honest answer is we don't know. We have no protocol for it, no agreed upon procedure, no global body with the authority to decide what to do next. There have been informal discussions and position papers and proposed frameworks, but nothing binding, nothing that says, if this happens, this is what humanity does, which is itself perhaps a measure of how difficult it is to imagine the moment. We plan for many things, natural disasters, power failures, even asteroid impacts, which we now have some capacity to detect and might eventually have some capacity to deflect. But for the received signal, the confirmed signal, the signal that doesn't go away when you check again in the morning, we have essentially nothing. And that's not a criticism, it's just a fact. This is genuinely uncharted territory. We don't know enough about what we'd be dealing with to plan for it precisely. We don't know how far away it would be. We don't know whether it would be a directed message or an accidental leak. We don't know whether the source still exists, given the light travel time. A signal from even a relatively nearby star might have left its source thousands of years ago. We don't know whether decoding it would be possible, straightforward, or completely beyond our current capabilities. We would essentially find ourselves in possession of a fact of staggering significance, in almost no context for understanding it, which is not so different in some ways from where we already are. We are already in possession of the fact equally staggering and equally lacking in full context that we exist at all, that awareness exists at all, that the universe, which is mostly hydrogen and helium and emptiness, contains on at least one small world beings capable of asking why. We already have one of the biggest facts in the universe. We've been living with it for hundreds of thousands of years, and we still haven't fully figured out what it means. Maybe a second big fact would help. Maybe it would just give us more to live with, more carefully, more humbly, for a very long time. The city where they watch the sky. I want to take you somewhere one more time before we start to come in for the night. Let's go to Samarkand. Not the Samarkand of today, though. Today it is beautiful, with its tiled domes and its ancient trade routes still written into the streets. The Samarkand I want to take you to is from the 15th century. The Samarkand of the astronomer Ulugh Beg, grandson of Tamerlane, ruler of a vast territory and one of the finest observational astronomers of any era. Ulugh Beg built an observatory, not a small one, a great one, a 3-story building in the hills above the city, housing an instrument of extraordinary size, a marble arc set into the ground, precisely aligned with the meridian, along which the sun and stars could be tracked with a precision that would not be surpassed for more than a century after his death. He used this observatory to compile a star catalog, a list of the positions of more than 1,000 stars, measured with a precision that modern analysis has confirmed to be remarkable. His measurement of the length of the sidereal year, the time it takes the Earth to complete one orbit of the Sun relative to the fixed stars, differs from the modern accepted value by less than a minute, 1 minute in a year-long measurement using 15th century instruments. He was not a man with access to computers or modern optics or any of the tools we take for granted. He had mathematics, careful observation, precision instruments built by skilled craftsmen, and the willingness to look again and again at the same thing, refining his numbers each time, understanding that more care would yield more truth. He also taught. He built a madrasa school in Samarkand Central Square, and he gathered students and scholars, and he discussed not just astronomy but mathematics and philosophy, the full range of what the human mind can reach for. His observatory was eventually destroyed not long after his death by those who feared that studying the sky too closely was somehow a challenge to faith. A fear that seems, from this distance, to have misunderstood both science and faith, because Ulugh, in his careful measurements of a star's position to fractions of a degree, was not competing with wonder. He was deepening it, making it more precise, more exact, more honest. The ruins of his great ark were found in the 20th century, buried beneath a hill in Samarkand. The ark is there, in the ground. The marble, worn smooth by centuries of measurement, still pointing at the meridian, still aligned with the sky. What silence teaches, the silence of the sky after the wow signal has lasted almost 50 years now. Not completely. There have been other moments, other strange signals, other things that didn't quite fit and then were resolved or weren't, but nothing like that night in Ohio. Nothing that has held its mystery intact across 50 years of scrutiny without being either confirmed or convincingly explained away. Just the silence. And I want to say something about silence that I think gets missed when we talk about it only as the absence of a signal. Silence teaches patience, not forced patience, the resigned, defeated kind where you stop hoping because hoping hurts, but the other kind, the kind that has been cultivated deliberately as a practice by people in many traditions who understood that the ability to remain present and attentive in the absence of obvious reward is one of the rarer and more valuable things a mind can develop. The radio astronomers who have spent their careers listening are practicing this, whether they call it that or not. They are maintaining a sustained attention in the face of an almost certain absence of dramatic result. They are saying by their continued presence that the listening matters even when nothing is heard. There's a quality of attention that only silence can teach. The kind where your instruments are tuned finely enough and your patience long enough that you don't miss the brief and subtle things. Because you've learned through long practice in silence not to need constant stimulation, not to need constant response, to be present and ready in the gaps. The wow signal lasted 72 seconds. If you weren't there and attending in exactly those 72 seconds, if your instrument was pointed elsewhere, if the page was turned at the wrong moment, if the data wasn't examined carefully enough, it would have passed unremarked. The only reason it exists in our records at all is because someone was there and attentive and careful. All the silence was preparation for those 72 seconds. All the silence is preparation for the next ones. The feeling at the end of a long night, this feeling, I think. It's the feeling of the very late hours when sleep is close but not quite there. When your thoughts have been somewhere large and interesting and now they're starting to drift. And the interesting large place is starting to blur at its edges and take on the softer quality of something that's becoming a dream. It's a good feeling. One of the specific pleasures of being human, I think this particular kind of loosening where the mind stops gripping and lets the night do what the night does. Before that happens entirely, I want to say something simple. I don't know what the wow signal was. No one does. It might have been something natural, briefly glimpsed, that we haven't yet found again. It might have been a rare but explicable astronomical event. It might have been something else entirely, something we don't have a category for yet. And it might, in the space kept open by genuine not knowing, have been something made, something directed, something sent. I hold that last possibility lightly, not because I'm certain of it or even think it's the most likely explanation, but because not knowing is real, and honoring it means holding open the space that not knowing requires. The universe is old, it is vast, it is, in its fundamental structure, lawful and mathematical and beautiful, in ways that continue to surprise the people who study it most carefully. It is produced, still listening, still here. Good night. And in at least one place, beings capable of awareness and curiosity and the building of instruments to extend the senses and the willingness to spend decades listening in the dark. Whether it is produced this elsewhere, we don't know. Whether it would produce it elsewhere in the future, we don't know. Whether it is already full of minds we simply haven't yet learned to hear, we don't know. And the not knowing, held gently, without anxiety, in the dark of a late night, is not a problem to be solved. It is simply where we are. It is simply the honest shape of what we know. And it is, I think, a good place to be. The signal that keeps traveling. Here's one last thing to carry with you into sleep. The wow signal came from somewhere in a direction toward the constellation Sagittarius. We don't know how far away it originated. We don't know what sent it. But if it was a radio signal, a wave of electromagnetic radiation moving at the speed of light, then it did not stop when we detected it. It didn't end in Ohio in 1977, having been received and circled and wondered about. It continued. It passed through our solar system, through the telescope in Ohio, and kept going outward in the direction it had always been going, into the space beyond us, into the dark on the other side, continuing at the speed of light, thinning and spreading with distance, but never stopping. Right now, this moment, as you read this, as the blanket settles and the night deepens, that signal, if it was what it might have been, is still traveling. Further than it was in 1977, further than it was an hour ago, moving through space that no human eye will ever see, past stars that have no names in any human language, through the interstellar medium, through the enormous empty passages between the galaxy's arms, going somewhere or going nowhere, going everywhere, thinning towards silence until it becomes indistinguishable from the background noise of the universe itself. But moving, and if there is something out there that can receive it, something with instruments sensitive enough to detect the radio signal that has been traveling for nearly 50 years since it passed through Ohio, then perhaps somewhere, someone is doing now what Jerry Amon did then. Going through a stack of data, page by page, and finding something that doesn't fit, and pausing and writing a word in the margin before you sleep. There's a phrase that some of the old astronomers used when they had finished their night's work and were preparing to rest. A phrase of acknowledgement, not exactly a prayer, but something in that direction. A recognition that the work they did, measuring and recording the positions of stars, was not separate from a larger frame, that the sky they studied was not theirs exactly, but was something they were privileged to attend to, something that exceeded them, I don't know exactly how to translate the feeling of that phrase into these words in this moment for you, but I'll try. Tonight, you've been somewhere large. You've been to the edges of what we know and to the edges of what we're still listening for. You've been to ancient observatories and modern radio telescopes and a hillside in Ohio and a marble ark buried under a hill in Samarkand. You've held the question of whether anyone is out there, not to solve it, but simply to carry it for a while. That's not a small thing to do. It takes a kind of openness to carry a question like that, a willingness to let the world be larger than your current understanding of it, a trust that the not knowing isn't a failure and that the wondering isn't wasted. And now it's time to sleep. Let the questions go, not permanently, but for the night. They'll be here when you wake up. The sky will still be there. The telescopes will still be turning. The signal, if there was a signal, will still be traveling. You don't need to hold any of it right now. Let the night have you. The stars above you, wherever you are real. The light reaching your window, even through clouds, even bounced and scattered and filtered through every layer of the atmosphere, is real light. Some of it billions of years old, that has been traveling since before this earth existed. It was on its way to you before you were born, before anyone in your lineage was born, before this planet was here to receive it. And tonight, it arrived. As it arrives every night, whether or not you look up, whether or not you wonder, whether or not you ever build an instrument sensitive enough to hear the next strange thing that passes through. Sleep well. The sky is doing what it always does. The universe is old and large, and in its fundamental structure, in its deep mathematical lawfulness, in its extraordinary openness to being known not entirely silent, not entirely still. And we are here, awake, or almost asleep, or somewhere in the dissolving in between,